After all this, you still...
I still want that gas, yes. And you had better deliver.
This is Greenhouse Gaslighting, a free and independent podcast discussing society and culture with a left-wing, down-to-earth perspective. If you've ever wanted a deep dive on the issues, but felt like the bar for entry was too high, then you're in the right place. So I'm remembering when we were trying to plan this initial episode, we literally were like, should we just do it on like this Trump Elon catfight? And of course, we always, let it air out a bit, see what develops. And I know like there's that repeated joke that we're in the cool zone of history, but did you expect it to get this busy this quick, or was some of this on the horizon?
Well, it's funny because I was just thinking about how it feels like that has completely vanished from the news cycle at this point.
Yeah. As soon as it came, it went.
Yeah, and it's just, I don't know if it's like the cool part. I mean, like, it's the cool part of history, quote unquote, in the sense that like things are happening, but like they're all like frustrating. They all like so much feels meaningless and arbitrary. Some of it is like consequential, and even the stuff that feels meaningless and arbitrary is deeply consequential. It's just that we live in this sort of political environment where there's not meaningful consequences for a lot. And the Trump Elon stuff, I don't necessarily know if there was anything like groundbreaking new that came out of that, other than I was really looking forward for a second to see, hopefully like live footage of Elon Musk in an El Salvador prison. But I'm not convinced that'll happen.
I mean, because even at the start of this term, we had already kind of concluded that this kind of infighting was inevitable. Maybe we couldn't have predicted just how soon it would have happened. And also, just as quickly as it happened, it left. Musk even retracted his statement about Trump being in the Epstein list, which is funny to me because you don't even have to be like a hoe-scaring conspiracy theorist to have known that Trump had ties to Epstein. You also just needed to be on Twitter.com during those years to have seen the photo of Elon next to Ghislaine Maxwell. So it definitely was like the pot calling the kettle black, but it's also like how much of this was just Musk trying to deflect from that one piece talking about his ketamine addiction? How much of this was him trying to cover up for allegedly having a tryst with Stephen Miller's wife? How much of this was tit for tat in response to Trump being like, I know a very successful billionaire, very neurotic, very successful. He takes the fat shot. It's not working, folks. It's not working.
And that had to have been Elon. Like, I can't think of who else it would have been.
It's obvious. It's so obvious that these two don't get along. And I thought the way this was going to go was someone going to call the famous bluff that Trump made, I think after he got elected, that Musk may or may not have won him a certain state through some kind of chicanery.
Yeah.
But again, just as soon as it came, just as soon it left.
Right, and we had this kind of also in this like very rapid news cycle, we did have the story about the lawsuit in New York, right, for like the election fraud there, where it was like there's like I can't remember if it's like a city or a county where Kamala received 0 votes.
Interesting.
Which like obviously tips off that like something's not going quite right there. And it's kind of weird with like a lot of this stuff, right? Where it's like there's definitely kind of we're seeing some semblance of like kind of like election denialism from the left. And in fact, at the protest, you do see it. There were a few signs that were questioning the election results, suggesting that there was like that kind of fraud, and like obviously the stuff that Trump has said, which again is he telling the truth? Is it just an off-colored remark? Things that Elon has said at times, you kind of wonder like if there is like some semblance of like, maybe there was something going on in terms of the election being hacked. But and maybe this is kind of part of the point, if anything, from their election denialism in the last cycle, is that you can't really go about like saying any of that without like just completely diminishing your own credibility.
It's almost like the same. At least this was a theoretical advice that was given on using the filibuster, which is as soon as you abuse it, the other side will abuse it.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that really played out for how the filibuster works in practice, but definitely in like the way we've just seen political rhetoric, political polarization of this variety turned up to 11. It's no longer at tit for tat. It's now like just hitting dangerous extremes, in the sense of like you can't climb off the ledge once you get there. And you get to the point where it's like, and this is again the stuff that keeps me up at night, which is what kind of social cohesion do you rebuild from this? Again, not my question to answer, but that is like the just the natural outcome of everything post Trump won, which is like just this mass insanity from COVID onwards hasn't been resolved, and we're just seeing it worsen in real time, and it's playing out in probably every aspect of not just life in America, but certainly our politics, for certain.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, honestly, that's kind of to the extent that we have a theme, maybe a little less deliberately, this time. I think that's kind of the theme of the day. There is because I think there's like we can talk about kind of a lot of the domestic unrest. We have the
Right.
shootings of the legislators in Minnesota.
Right.
All of that very much feels like the like all of this is kind of the result of Pandora's box having been opened under Trump 1.
Yeah.
And to some extent maybe beforehand as well, of course. And I think that that's a kind of another like sort of sub theme with some of these stories too, is sort of the unique singularity that is or isn't Donald Trump, right?
Yeah, and I think like we've hinted at this idea for a while of like Trump as somebody who kind of rapidly unravels several quiet or unnoticed contradictions in American politics, whether it's discourse or political practice. But the thing that I'm starting to notice about maybe contradiction, especially in the American context, and how it's been playing out these past couple of years, is it's more like a thread that just like unravels everything. And rather than understanding what's tied to what, which is what one would do if you're trying to address contradiction in your society, of course it can come to a head in conflict, or you can try to negotiate your way out of it and come to a new consensus, however you do it. But just simply pulling the thread is like you said, it's been like opening Pandora's box, and I don't think anyone in power right now, even if they understand that conceptually, I still don't think they're being serious about meeting the moment with this.
No, and some of it too is the fact that we have seen consensus vanish, right?
Yeah.
It's like we can't begin to work to a new consensus when there's not even really a consensus on anything, even just you know fairly basic and kind of borderline irrefutable facts. And again, I think we'll touch on that as we kind of like go on throughout like discussing all these various occurrences in this episode.
Yeah, so I mean, we'll probably get to like the background marquee event that this feud kind of overshadowed, which was the slim passage of the quote unquote big beautiful bill. To be completely honest, I still don't understand a lot of this. I have been bewildered by the news cycle as many people have, but from what I understand, this is just a continuation of the austerity and low tax policies that Trump already had in place, if not extending them just a little further.
Yeah, I mean, it's an extension of that, right? There's a lot of Medicare coverage is abridged by this as well. It's for the most part, right? It is a continuation with maybe a slight enhancement of the kind of Trump one era like policies. And it only has passed the House up to this point. I don't think it's passed the Senate yet. And if it does pass the Senate, it's going to be a different version. They're going to have to
Okay.
ping pong it or whatever. But that was where like the inciting incident was that like Elon came out saying like he will primary or back primary challengers for any Republican who votes for it. And I think, and as I said, I don't necessarily know where this feud goes from here, if this feud is even like still alive and well. I mean,
Yeah.
Trump is petty enough, but he also loves people who um just kowtow to him as well, right? Like he's
Yeah.
fully aware of like past, grievances with people like Lindsey Graham. And you can see this in interviews where it's talked about where he's like, oh yeah, I really like that he will criticize me 1 minute and then just like bow and, kiss my ass the next. It is something that he's fully aware of. It's no mystery to him. No one's pulling the wool over his eyes. So I don't necessarily know that Elon's going to face consequences, but I think the big question of this event was going to be sort of like, what would the impact be on the Republican Party, right? Like, I don't necessarily think Trump or Elon is the more popular side of that by any stretch. He's probably the least popular among the voters, but if he just floods the zone with money in Republican primaries, would that have had consequences? And I don't know if he's still going to do that or what. It's not particularly clear.
Right, especially when, the big marquee event about him was and again, this was probably obvious to dedicated Elon haters that this guy's clearly on something. Um Probably the big revelation was it the New York Times that was like this guy has been on ketamine the entire time, basically.
Right, yeah, and that article was crazy because it was
Yeah.
like I mean just like the whole like Elon saying that like oh Trump's in the Epstein files, right? As unsurprising as that would be to literally anyone who would like take that as like true, right? Like no, there's no question about that in anyone's mind to the extent that those files actually exist that he is in them. Um but the article, what was shocking for me about it was not that like Elon was like on drugs and ketamine, right? That was much was obvious. I was just shocked at how robust the article was and how
Yeah.
quickly it had come out. Right? This is the kind of stuff that you would expect would be like released, like, oh hey, we're in um the 50th year of the uh Baron Trump Jr. um caliphate or whatever,
Oh
like
god.
I mean, like just like some like ridiculous far fetched like future like story this would come out, but like no, it's like the minute he is like stepping back from the government, this story comes out that like hey yeah like this person who had access to like all this information like and again like part of it too is like so like they've really succeeded in flooding the zone where like there's 1.5 million things to be outraged about at any given moment.
Yep.
And like everyone forgets that like oh yeah like remember like when Doge had like all of your social security numbers, remember when Doge did this, like just all these little things. And those scandal, I mean they're not little things, but all those scandals are kind of forgotten about, but it's just like knowing that like he was on like drugs constantly during that time paints an even like worse brush over that.
And it's like I know like it's a common like not even a jokey joke. It's like it's something that should be understood when we look at like World War One and World War Two of like how
Oh yeah.
many European leaders were just zooted Just the Kaiser
Sure.
was absolutely zooted when they shot him. The Nazi high command is just tweaking on amphetamines the entire
Yeah.
time. And again, it's like there is maybe some worthwhile discussion to be had on like, is this fascism? Is this just a flavor of right wing authoritarianism? Is Trump like I know that that's its own like infinite loop to get stuck in, but these guys really are obsessed with the trappings of classic fascism to an absurd extent.
Right. Yeah. Like, it's like, hey, like, what are like the lamest aesthetics of the Nazis? Let's also copy those.
Just being an absolute degenerate, just tweaking. Like,
Right.
and then this is another thing that, in that same breath as this is all coming out, NPR had this interview with a former Doge engineer.
Yeah.
Long story short, the guy's like, I went in expecting to find fraud. All I found was maybe like they're using older technology or some of these like older like computer systems, but this like fraud and waste and like intentional inefficiency does not exist. And for people who have been studying public administration or people who have just been studying like US governmental history for like quite, especially in the recent years, right? We all know that like the budget keeps getting cut for a lot of agencies, state and federal. Um and efficiency comes in to take the place of short-staffed and under-resourced
Yeah.
departments. That isn't to say that like, the United States government as a whole is like a moral paragon. I'm not denying that. But what I am saying is like this idea that um you just send in like a Don Quixote technocrat into the federal, government, have him like just put his tentacles into whatever and try and like eliminate waste when all they did was control F black, which is how those black site lists got
Yeah.
released anyways. Which again, it's just stupid, venal, and racist all at the same time. But it's like this guy is like, I went in.
Don't forget
I, look,
the transgender mice.
oh my god, oh my god. All I'm saying is Happy Pride Month to the transgender mice. That's shout out to them.
Not anymore. We're not funding them. They don't exist.
Listen, we gotta start a GoFundMe. We gotta start a collection plate. Something for the rats. They might be serving, and we're not supporting them. That's the real problem.
Yeah.
I'm sorry for that, folks. So once again, like this thing that everyone who has been paying attention knows for a fact was fraudulent is confirmed to be fraudulent.
Yeah.
And like you said, there's no practical consequences for this still.
Right, and like so much of it is that like what the quote unquote waste that they found, and it's even discussed in that article a bit too, is like it's the stuff that he personally deems to be a waste of money.
Yes.
Right. It's like that's really what it all boils down to. And we know kind of how Republicans think what's a waste of money. Like, oh hey, like healthcare for people, yeah, that's a waste of money. Go find a job, or whatever. Even though like again, half of these programs are essentially subsidizing really poorly paying jobs.
Yeah.
But that's another issue entirely. But that's basically what it is. Is it just comes down to ideological differences that in terms of determining what is like fraud and waste, or not even so much fraud, just what they consider to be wasteful spending. That they're acknowledging is not fraud, but it also doesn't matter because you're still going to hear the talking points that they cut fraud, that there was these 500-year-old people on Social Security, and all that nonsense, which is like, again, it's like anyone who has ever interacted with like the government bureaucracy knows that like there's no way that like that people were actually like collecting Social Security like 300 years after they died or whatever. Like all of this stuff was nonsense, but it doesn't matter because we live in sort of this multi-reality system.
Exactly. That multi-reality system is a spot on way to look at that. And something I'm just thinking about too now is Trump tries to be all things to all conservatives. I don't know if we've talked about this explicitly, and maybe
I
we'll
don't think
touch
so.
on. Yeah, and I don't think maybe we'll have to touch on this when we eventually talk about the Birchers, but something like I think about, right, is like using Make America Great Again as like a literal nod to Reagan, or even this like invocation of reducing government waste. It kind of is. He feels like a throwback to almost like the Ross Perot or like U.S. taxpayer party style conservatism. It's a long forgotten style of paleo conservatism, almost, where like we got to get rid of this government spending waste, and like that almost used to be a euphemism for like the military industrial complex. It used to be a little more paranoid in that direction, and I'm just wondering,
It
like,
hasn't been for so long, though.
exactly. So I'm
Uh,
just like,
yeah, like I mean, really, since Reagan, it's been like really just code for like, hey, there's like undeserving black people getting your money.
pretty
Um,
much. And like I don't know, someone was talking about, I think this was on Chapo. They were talking about how Cash Patel was on Rogan recently, trying to be like, "Listen, man, I'm the FBI director. It's me, Cash Patel. I
yeah,
went and looked. There's no Epstein footage. Don't you trust me, man?" And it's like
and Joe Rogan
they
just buys it immediately.
because I mean, and that's the thing. Like maybe we'll talk about the accursed search for the liberal Joe Rogan, but like everyone knows this guy believes the last thing someone told him. That's what he's
Hmm.
been doing ever since the podcast started.
Yeah,
Um, but at the same time, like there are like conservatives who were on like the, yeah, Epstein was involved with the Democrats. There's going to be mass arrests, and then they're not seeing it, and they're seeing this weird obfuscation at play, and they're like, "But what was the point of that?" And I'm wondering, maybe like this invocation of exposing government waste has been, like you said, it's been exploited as kind of a euphemism for defunding welfare along racial lines. But I'm sure there's got to be someone who's reading this being like, "Wait, there was no waste? What?" But
yeah.
on the
I mean,
subject, oh, go ahead, go ahead.
you'd like to think that, but I don't know. I'm very skeptical on a lot of those things lately.
I do believe that. I mean, it's because it's like I wonder if in choosing to ignore or trying my best to avoid learning about different conservative strains, to put it bluntly, have I like created like a blind spot that I need to recover from? Or is it just safe to say it doesn't matter, nothing means anything to this crowd, and you don't have to worry about it? And I was feeling the same way too about like missing out on reading about Curtis Yarvin and his like neo-reactionary movement. But then
Mm.
when you look at it up close, it's like this is just like the right-wing version of Harry Potter liberals. I don't need to take this seriously.
That's
But
fair.
on the subject of actual fraud and waste, the military parade on June 14th, Trump's birthday. I didn't even know it was Trump's birthday. Um
That kind of
to
came
it,
up a little bit near the end of that.
so was there like a happy birthday Trump thing at the end of it?
I don't know. I mean, maybe I did see because he had the other one. God, where was it? The other military rally, where like I don't know, like any like because they had people like singing "Happy Birthday" to the U.S. military, which I was like, man, even at like like even in like kindergarten, I think I would have found that like deeply cringe.
Right.
But I don't know.
So I I was definitely of no mind to watch it. The thing that caught my attention that day was the report about the Minnesota lawmakers getting shot, which we'll talk about that later, but um I had no idea that most of these were like prop or replica vehicles, and most of the people in the parade were actors in some way. Like it wasn't even actual service members. And there was some memo going out about how like if you're going to be on camera, don't be fat. Like it was just like it was very image focused in a very absurd
Yeah.
way. Um this thing had a hold on like dads across America, especially like the History Channel dads. Doing this on Father's Day weekend, that is diabolical.
That's true. I was gonna say it was, the day before Father's Day.
It was really giving like, oh, I saw that in the Patton documentary last week, but like, again, this thing just had a hold like on like my parents had some friends over and they were watching it on the TV, and I'm like, who's getting off to this? The neighbors were watching it with their loudspeaker on. I'm like, what's going on here? What's going on here? But it all just seems kind of cringe, especially, when you consider the fact that Netanyahu and Iran are getting into a fight and Trump's just kind of sitting there watching the parade. I don't know if I should be paranoid or laugh at that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's like the parade. It's like it's one of those things where, again, it's sort of like aesthetically fascist. It seemed to be pretty underattended. Anyone I've
Yeah.
heard that's like seen any of it thought it was like deeply boring. Um, and yeah, I mean, and it's occurring, sort of in the I guess the shadows, right, of like, the broader like protests against Trump that are
Yeah.
occurring, coinciding with that. Um, Again, how consequential are either of those things? Who knows? But I do think that like this was just kind of one of those, again, symptoms of just sort of overplaying himself, right? And I think it reminds me, because there's been a lot of other examples of this throughout the administration, right? Where it's like, we keep talking like, you have this whole, government efficiency thing and, these cuts, and yet people are like, oh, well, how expensive is a military parade? And, probably pretty expensive. All the other little things that we use the military for, right? Like, oh, they gotta, we gotta have security for Trump at the Super Bowl. We've gotta, have security for him every time he goes golfing, like all of this stuff. So it's just kind of like it's raised like the scrutiny of all of these things. But like,
Yeah.
again, it's just sort of like, there are 1.5 million like micro and macro scandals in the Trump administration, in the first one and the second one, to the point where just like none of it like bears any consequence. He is now selling a cell phone service, I think, as of this
Huh?
morning. I can't remember what it was. But he promoted it. Again, you're supposed to, disinvest and whatnot, but that's just not happening anymore. Because he wasn't punished for anything similar to that in the first term.
Trump family and phone service licensing
Yeah.
deal touts $499 a device.
You could get a Switch 2 with Mario Kart for that price, or you could get a Trump phone. Tough call, I know.
Tough call. Tough call. Unrelated, I don't know if I could do either. Like
Well,
I want
maybe
to. You go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, well, maybe wait till like employment is resecured.
Well, I was also just like going because I want to do like a state of tech and gaming at some point. But the thing about the Switch 2 that's been really getting me is like it's really not all that different from the actual Switch. I'm sure there's like hardware differences that'll matter.
Yeah,
But if you look at like the modder community that's already active on this, like the Joy-Cons on the Switch 2 are just the same, except they have a mouse functionality. So people are already making like 3D printer adapters. The OS is the same. And just like that crazy thing in the new end user license where it's like, we reserve the right to brick your console if we think you're doing anything we don't like.
is that new?
Yeah. And I'm
Okay.
gonna try to link to the let's see. Sorry for the digression, dear listener. You already knew. So let's see. Switch to new user agreements.
Like, I'm not going to endorse that at all, but I do think that that's probably not like overly uncommon in terms of a feature that's probably on other systems as well.
Yeah, I'm sure it probably exists in other systems, but it's still like for whatever reason, Nintendo has been particularly litigious lately when it comes to what used to be previously, like, even if it was like someone dubious, it wasn't as damaging to their business as they make it out to be. So things like people
Right.
making mod chips or like emulating games that they own or ROM hacks, things of that nature.
Right.
They've been particularly litigious about that lately, and then this is just another step in that direction that's frustrating people.
Yeah, they've been kind of litigious for a while, and I don't know necessarily if it's again kind of fueling the digression, right? I don't necessarily know if they are more litigious than other companies per
Mm-hmm.
se, and they just tend to get more crap for it. I mean, not that I'm ever gonna like take the corporate side of that per se, but it's just like I don't know if it's like actually more pronounced on the Nintendo end or not. But I know that they've had like over the years just a lot of I think unnecessary lawsuits and whatnot, and that have been a little bit more controlling than they ought to have been.
Yeah, and I think what it is it sets the precedent for the industry if they take the legal case. So
Sure.
even if other companies aren't as vocal or aren't as litigious, they might benefit from a shareholder perspective. But
Right.
I'll table this for another episode. Let's see. Do we want to start with domestic or international issues?
Um, up to you.
Um,
I guess we've got the international ones listed first.
yeah. I mean, this kind of happened all in the same period. Again, Israel's on the warpath. Something that we kind of talked about earlier was, as ICE has been getting more vicious and is pursuing otherwise, law abiding um foreign residents. So Marco Rubio's statements on the revocation of visas if you say anything in support of Palestine, which, to any sane observer is a violation of the First Amendment.
I think it
Uh
was. I think it was phrased in. I think more so in criticism of Israel rather than even pro-Palestine. Um, which is worse. And again, like it's the fact
yeah,
that you can criticize the American government while you're here, but not Israel
that's
is dubious.
interesting.
Um, and not that I would endorse that policy either, but it's just furthers on that. And like, and again, like, like Rubio is a good highlight of the fact that like this is sort of your model Republican in a lot of ways, right? That's the
Hmm.
person who was, touted into 2016 as like, sort of the great white hope of the Republican Party. And here he is like kind of repeatedly um being one of probably the more fascistic components of the Trump administration as a whole.
In a
Um,
way, he's
I would go
almost
that
like a
far.
he's like a medicated version of Ron DeSantis, right? Where it's like he's not as prone to. I mean, I still think he embarrasses himself in public, but that's
Oh
another,
yeah. Well, he's not as
discussion.
he's not as terminally online as DeSantis.
Yes, yes,
He's I don't know, like it's like he's like terminally like in like the print newspaper maybe. Um, like for like, and I don't know if I would necessarily go that far, but it's just like he's very caught up in like kind of like older Republican issues, right?
yeah,
Which I mean, like, yeah, Israel is like obviously relevant in the present moment as well, but it's kind of this classical position where like I don't think like their base really cares that much. Like, yeah, you have the evangelicals who care, but I mean, for the most part, like I don't think like your average like kind of. I mean, I kind of hate using like the MAGA Republican as a label, just virtue of like the way it's been kind of used to sort of I feel like be overly forgiving of the rest of the party.
yeah.
But most of them, like I mean, they're raging anti-Semites. They would gladly, pitch the whole like the idea of like Israel like being nuked to death by Iran is probably quite attractive to them. Not that I think that even with rising tensions, I don't think that's going to happen. For various reasons.
I mean, that was a joke that they made on the newest Chapo episode where it's like someone was talking about their MAGA relatives being like, listen, I was okay with the deportations, but why do I have to fly an Israeli flag next to the US flag? What's going on here? Not that I condone the mindset either.
Right.
But it is weird that like the Republican Party, and I mean people have talked about this for generations, right? Where it's like the link between the legitimate, respectable rights and the kind of what used to be the pariah white nationalist organizations in the US. Those used to be, like treated like the old lady in the attic. Now maybe those links are a little more visible, but there is still that attitude of deniability that they try to take.
Yeah. And it's like it's a weird pronouncement with this too. Is like, I think that like the strangest part of this, and like again, I'm not surprised by Trump's stance on Israel or Iran for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
But it is kind of weird in this environment of like America first. Like that is like the big emphasis, right? Like we are
I
going to
was just
screw
about to say that.
we're
Oh my god.
like even more so than the first term, right? Where that was still a talking point, but like we're really like to the point where we're like screw the rest of the world. We don't need any imports from them. We're going to tariff them into oblivion or whatever. We do not need our allies, but we do need to support Israel. And also, and Rubio had said this as well, where like because the U.S. had like posted some acknowledgement of Russia Day or whatever for the first time since the invasion of Ukraine, I think.
About
And
the G7 thing?
no, this was before the G7 thing.
Oh yeah, I know what you're. Yeah.
Where they're just like commemorating Russian Day, and then like Rubio had said like, oh, America always remains committed to the Russian people, and it's like, what? Like, I mean, like, what a bizarre statement to like say. It's the kind of thing that you would say, like, kind of just like in like sort of like your kind of hippie like type diplomacy, but like we're skewing that for our own allies. Why are we like, oh, like we're committed to ourselves and the people of Russia and Israel, and the rest of the world can go kill itself.
So, I know me and you have talked about this angle privately. I don't think we had a chance to talk about this on the show at any point. About Russia kind of being the number two supporter of Israel, with America being number one.
Yeah.
People kind of assume that the UK is number two. It might be closer to number three or four in that sense. But when it comes to propping up Israel, Russia is like the secret second hand in that. And I'm not trying to be shady about that. That's just how the rhetoric goes about this, right? And we had kind of talked about, when it comes to how the conflict in Ukraine was handled, suddenly dumped to then go all in on Israel. How much of this was an attempt for Biden to try to get Israel closer to the United States in any circumstance, as opposed to Russia? And then now what we're seeing with Trump is already kind of having
evil.
Yes, it's a different. I mean, you're onto something there though, right? Because it's like, Biden, for all his shucking and jiving and all his deference to Netanyahu and the Likudniks, never was going to get their cosign, even if they did kiss his ass a few times.
Yeah.
Trump already had the buy-in. There's all the talk about how, Netanyahu had secretly wanted Trump to get in anyways. And on to top it off, there's the whole, oh, Trump and Putin get along, whatever. So is the new direction with that, somewhat limited conversation we've had, right? Is the new direction to kind of thaw things with Russia to try and thaw things out with Israel, or are things going to get worse? And I know like this was alphabet soup. This is probably the most alphabet soup I've ever done on an episode. But what are your thoughts?
I can't see it like leading to anything good.
Mhm.
There's just yeah, like, there's just nothing I can think of, right? And, like, I'm not, like, saber rattling, like, with Russia per se, but I don't, like, it's like, eh, I think a lot of the, like, kind of, like, I don't know, like, in America, you have, like, obviously, like, the kind of, like, just pro-Russia side because, like, they hate gay people too, and, like, they like the anti-woke country.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that's kinda like what it is. It's like Russia is, like, on their side of the culture war, and they like it, and it's not just, like, homophobia, it's a litany of other, culture war issues too, of
Right,
course.
right.
But I think that, there's the other side where it's like and I think that, like, we're increasingly seeing it's, like, a lot of, paid podcasters and whatnot,
Yeah.
where, like, it's kinda like, "Oh, well, we need to, like, ease things up with Russia," which, like, okay, yeah, like, if we want to avoid nuclear war, like, yeah, you don't want, the major powers to have conflict and whatnot. Again, though, like, the idea that, like, letting them win in Ukraine or whatever, like, whatever that looks like, that doesn't, that has a lot of consequences for, like, nuclear proliferation and things like that. Where, like, you have a lot of people now who are just like, "Oh, it's a really good idea for countries to develop their own nuclear weapons." And it's like, okay, well, that's kind of, you know, defeating the paradigm that we've had really since the Cold War. Um, and I don't think for the best, right? Like, I don't think, like, having, like, I don't necessarily see that leading towards, like, enhanced peace, even under, sort of mutually assured destructive terms, right? And we've seen, like, kind of what's happening in Iran, right? Which kind of is the big foreign policy story, right? That
Right.
emerged. Was it Friday or
Pretty
yeah,
much, yeah, Friday
Thursday?
and this
Thursday.
weekend.
Yeah, it was like it was Thursday, I think, that Israel attacked, then Iran attacked back on Friday, and then it's back and forth this weekend. And, like, it's weird where, like, like, in terms of, like, what was the objective here? And it's like, I think the objective is that and I mean, my first inclination was I felt Netanyahu probably overplayed his hand in terms of thinking that we would go all in on this conflict with him. I don't necessarily know that, like, we won't, you know what I mean? Like, it's I don't know what all in looks like per se, but, like, I definitely think we're gonna continue supporting it, like, there's a report that supposedly, Trump vetoed a plan to kill the leader of Iran. And I don't take that to mean like, oh, this is, the dovish president. Like,
Right.
we nearly, in his first term, there are several reports. We nearly went to war with Iran multiple times. Um, Half the time it was just because, like, one of his advisors, like, threw the orders in the trash, basically, because they thought, like, he was just, not in, like, his right frame of mind when he had commanded it. So, like, I mean, that conflict, I think we're on the precipice of going off on. I know there was talks about doing a new Iran deal, which I think is more so, like, as I said, when I was saying that before, that I don't see Iran, like, nuking Israel or anything like that. Is I don't think they have, like, like, I think they've had issues developing it. That's why they're back on the table, right? I think that's why they were willing to come back and negotiate, but they're kind of negotiating from this point of weakness. Um, I think there's some ridiculous levels of, like, emboldenment from people who are in favor of seeing this conflict escalate. Like, I saw people saying that, like, oh, like, Israel could, like, topple this regime in, like, 6 days, and it's like they can't even do that in Gaza.
Right.
Like, there's just a lot of insanity, I think, surrounding this, and, like, in terms of, like, where America fits in this, like, we're seeing, like, commentary, like, all over the place on this.
Yep.
I really don't know one way or the other, right? Like, I mean, I don't think anyone's gonna be enthusiastic to go to war with Iran, but I shouldn't say no one. There's definitely people who would be, but I just don't like, in terms of the citizenry. I just think it's not gonna be a popular conflict.
Yeah, when you said no one, I was getting a very loud phone call from Marco Rubio.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
I mean,
I was like, no, I didn't mean it like that. And even, like, because I was thinking, like, just in this terms of the citizenry, but I'm like, no, like, there's, like, there's hawks in the public.
right, right, and I think, like, to the extent because I pretty much agree with your read of this too. I think people have been like kind of I don't really follow some of the kind of cosplay discourse about supporting the conflict because it's kind of senseless. But all of this in the additional context of how even previous Republican administrations like Reagan, like the Bushes, there was this idea of reining in Israel after they've had their tantrum. And I don't know if I can necessarily pin this on Biden specifically, although you can definitely hold him accountable among others. Is because again, like Trump won really is where we set the paradigm for this.
Yeah, when I think it's one of those things where like I think that the Biden admin helped normalize it, right?
Yes,
Kind
yes.
of the same way with like the pardons, where pardoning his son, i- it has not allowed Trump to pardon anyone he wouldn't have otherwise, but it has kind of minimized the discourse around that because you're going to get, like anytime it comes up in any interview in the media, it's going to be a both sides thing. Um, we're seeing it a lot with these other domestic situations when we get to them. We're seeing it probably a bit with this. I haven't really watched a ton of the coverage. A lot of people are kind of like some of the coverage I saw was just sort of consigned on it. Like, yeah, like Iran's shooting missiles at Israel after Israel attacked it. And like that was kind of just like, yeah.
I mean, it was. I think what it is just it's just the extension of the Musk Trump Twitter field day. So there has been some typical Twitter humor in response to some of the darkest stuff. I think the funniest joke, forgive me, was um Netanyahu had to flee to Greece because his wife was too fat to fit in the bunker. Um, there's also just like again funny stuff I'm seeing about like people protesting outside where he was posted up in Greece, but um
Well, there was some stuff I was seeing from the I can't remember what it was exactly, but somewhere in India, like one of the like government agencies was like saying that like because it said like Iran was going to do a nuclear test tomorrow, and then so they should do it over Tel Aviv. Um, and it was all because I guess that like Israel opened a whole can of worms by like I can't remember what region they removed off the map.
I
That
remember
that's
this.
like
I remember this. Yeah.
I'm like, so maybe you remember which like what they didn't put in India, and like I guess it's just created like just deep resentment between the two countries.
I again like the Hindutva supporters of Israel are some of the funniest people you'll see, and I say funny in scare quotes because like it is extremely like violent the rhetoric they use. It's pretty much on this grounds of like hell yeah, I want to see bad things happen to Muslims, which is the stupidest ideology I've ever seen.
Sure.
But it is funny how like um and again like we're delving into like dirtbag podcast territory with this one, but like so some of the funniest interactions I've seen is like it'll be like one of these Indian Twitter users being like, "We support Israel," and then like an Israeli comment in Hebrew, which the minute you hit translate, you know you're about to see something insane, and it's always just them being like, "We don't need your support, we got this" type shit, and that's me like heavily editing for levity.
Sure.
So that was incredibly funny to look at, where it's like your tit for tat is like Israel didn't support your territory claims, which funny stuff. I probably will have to do an extended episode on the Indian right at some point because it's amazingly funny stuff. But that's again we'll have to table that for another episode.
Yeah.
Um, along with that too, something that had also happened along the same time was Israel intercepting the Madlin aid ship. I don't know if you'd seen anything about that. It kind of went to the way I was expecting it to, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I everyone wanted them to kind of get that aid out there, but I had a feeling in my gut, it's like they're gonna get intercepted by Israel and get, Thankfully, I feel like people only got a slap on the wrist for doing it and sent back.
Yeah, I
Greta,
mean, I think that because the other side of it was definitely like, I mean, you had Lindsey Graham openly tweeting that I hope she dies,
which was
and
insane,
whatnot.
which was
Yeah,
fucking insane.
yeah.
Yeah, that all that stuff, and again, it's like anytime Greta Thunberg is in the media, she's always just taking a lashing in like a very revealing way for the people doing it.
Oh yeah.
It's just like the most blatant like um anti-youth misogynist stuff where I'm just like, oh god, this fucking sucks
And
every
she's like
time
a
I see
lot
it.
older than people think she is.
Right. But it's like
22,
again,
22 is still young, but like people act like, oh, it's like, this like 2-year-old.
yeah, it's like people talk about like child stars and like how they themselves might be deficient in some sense, but it's also revealing that the audience is responsible for some of that treatment. And I think in this politicized version of that,
Right.
like the right, just anytime they have to see Greta, it's like you could just like close the video. You didn't have to look at this, my guy. And like all the comments are like, I hope you fucking it's so fucking gross. It's so fucking gross. But and again, I'd seen like one of the people on the age ship was Liam Cunningham, who was on Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
I think he was Sir Davos. He has some powerful words about why he was doing it. And it's again one of those things where if you really think about the transgression that they're being called out for, it was delivering aid.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the correct window would have been for Biden to call up Netanyahu and be like, "Hey, this needs to stop now." But since we never saw that happen, it's just going to continue to. No one wants this to get worse. No one fucking wants this to get worse. But like, it's this has been monstrous to watch.
Yeah, for sure.
So, in the same vein, right? There has been varying waves of resistance and protest to various aspects of this Trump term. Before we maybe talk about the situation about the LA riots, what's been your read of the No Kings protests so far?
I'm not 100% sure. I mean, I'm generally like in favor of it and whatnot. I think it's a movement that I think is important to try to harness that energy into broader opposition. I don't love the label of it. I think it's again, it kind of gets back to what I was saying, where there's sort of this like kind of like the unique evils of Trump rather than kind of like the broader thing, right? Like it's because I remember this was like a response that Slotkin had to um the the anti-oligarchy movement, right? Where it's like, well, it should be about like no kings instead. And it's like, yeah, but like a king is like this singular monarch, right? The issues like Trump is definitely a problem. He's definitely an issue, but there's
Mm-hmm.
also this broader ecosystem that enabled him, right? Like you don't have Trump without or Trump 2 without Elon Musk. You don't have a lot of these things without like and when you don't even have Trump without like, him being an something of an oligarch himself. Right? Like, probably lower on the totem pole than a lot of them in terms of like that class, but he's his entire like claim to success is that he is rich and that success kind of, came upstream of that.
Yeah.
Um so like I have an issue with that, but I do think like, to me it highlights that like again, like this is I mean, there's definitely some struggles that we're having with broader coalition building, and I know that like there's a lot of stuff with it when it comes to sort of um, other kind of failures from like the liberal space that we can talk about, or maybe we'll talk about, and we'll always of course talk about them in future episodes too. But I think that like it's good that it's happening. I think that energy just needs to be harnessed productively, and I'm not saying it was being harnessed unproductively. But I think that like it needs to be extended to like a broader critique than just Trump doing. So, and again, it's like you get into this territory of like, well, it's not just the illegal stuff that's the problem. It's
Right.
a myriad of other things that he's doing that are in theory fully legal that are also problematic.
Right. And this is something that everything you touched on is brilliant. Because I didn't even know that this was in response to one of Slotkin's comments.
I don't think it was, to be fair. It might have been incidentally that. I
Okay,
don't know
okay, okay.
who. I mean, I guess I don't know who was that was organizing it as like No Kings as like the label. I don't know.
Mm. Because something I've seen in some of the rhetoric around um this protest wave, and also their criticisms of maybe more organic resistance to ICE, is this idea of appealing to institutions, which, like you said, like the system is kind of on trial itself for producing Trump. We can't,
Sure.
view him as a mere aberration. And in some ways, like, he is the product of the Trump tax cuts, right? Oh, sorry, the Reagan tax cuts, right?
Yeah.
So in that vein, like, there's just a lot of these things about like, why were they waving Mexican flags at these protests? Why was this, that, and the other? Why don't you obey civil authorities? And one of the things that they were advising attendees of the No Kings protests was, if the police come, put your hands up and sit down, or if you see violence break out, sit down. And I'm like, I just that seems kind of like reckless advice, like, if you see things get violent at a protest, I think the right move would be to run.
That doesn't make any sense because like the police show up like that part I don't disagree with because I think like I mean again you're kind of asking people to martyr themselves.
Right.
Like, but like, yeah, like if you show like, okay, we did nothing, right, and we still like got beaten up by the cops. Um, though again, I mean, I don't. It's one of those things again where it's like in terms of persuading a broader swath of the population, I don't know if it's possible anymore. Just virtue of the fact that it's like I don't know how like any person who's not just like always going to be like just super pro cop is ever going to be like, oh no, like this final act is what broke the camel's back for me in terms of police being brutal.
Right. And it's like that ideologization. I'm inventing a new word here, right? Of like the George Floyd protests and the kind of anti-crime rhetoric that swept up after it, and this kind of idea of policing what types of dissent and protest are appropriate versus which ones aren't, um really kicked up in that vein. And you're kind of seeing like the next wave be heavily influenced by that, which, even by the standards of like the Trump one resistance, quote unquote, whether it was like the pussy hats, or whether it was the kind of somewhat consolidated Democratic Party approach against Trump, this looks much more anemic and just confused in response. It's like you'll have like anarchists, progressives, and like anti-communists in the same rally. And I'm not saying that like you can't have a big tent. I'm just saying like, what is the project at play here, other than fuck Trump? Just verbatim, with nothing deeper than that. And I don't know, I was talking to Sky about this because as I've been trying to like just deal with some stuff in my personal life, right? Like, I have been feeling this kind of sense of guilt, like, have I been doing enough? And to some extent, we were kind of talking about how like some protests like this end up being a form of pacification, especially when there's no demand being made. It's almost like you show up
That's your
and
part.
that's your part. Just showing up was your part. And you didn't even articulate a demand. But
Yeah, I
again,
mean,
Go ahead, go ahead.
I can see that. I don't know if I don't know if I'm that cynical, but I can definitely see it, and it's I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of yeah, like I mean, like you said, like the anti, and it's like I don't know, like we criticize like the resist movement in hindsight, but like I mean, it was pretty effective in like the short term. It's just that like
Right.
it doesn't form, and like kind of like you said with like the Big Ten, it doesn't form like a coalition that you can or at least I mean maybe you can work with it, but it's just not being harnessed in a productive way. And I think that like right now, like what like the odd part of it all, right, is that like you have this in conjunction with like survey after survey showing that like the Democratic Party as like an organization, as like a unit, a label. I don't know exactly what, right? But it's at its like least popular point like ever, right? Like people hate the Democratic Party as well. They're not gonna, take some people might be taking to the streets about that, but it's not like in the same way that you have like the hatred of Trump that is a lot more, kind of organic and whatnot. But like that is it's fundamentally tied to like this idea that the party has like failed to deliver for these people, right? Not just like
Right.
from a policy perspective, but I think like even like, a lot of these folks, right? They think of politics purely in kind of like I don't want to say a team sports way, right? But it's like kind of in this binary like we win or we lose. And right now we're losing and we're blaming like the leaders of our team for that. Kind of justly so in a lot of ways. Um and there's a lot of aspects that I keep thinking of that, and like it's weird to me that even when this is kind of like No Kings is sort of that more like kind of PR friendly, like they're not going to go totally like ham on the oligarchy because like what about their donors? Can't insult them. Um, so like well, none of their donors are kings, so we're doing this. But how many like elected officials are you really seeing like tap into this in a meaningful way? Like some of them are like posting about it and whatnot. You've got John Fetterman like, oh, I'm going to the military parade instead.
Yeah.
Like you know what I mean? Like it's just like they're very anemic in the face of like I mean, as much as Chuck Schumer was rightfully maligned for the people are aroused comment, like they are aroused. And he's not doing anything. He's just leaving. He's just blue balling the people. He's
Right.
there's no happy ending here. Um, you're if you have an erection that lasts more than 24 hours, call a doctor, and we've got one right now. And the doctor's not here.
Oh no. And okay, so maybe on that end too, right? I'm gonna I'm trying to be the straight man here. Whew, so with that as well, right? There is this increased like attitude of like why is there resistance to law enforcement, when I think like what's getting left out of this, and this isn't just in Los Angeles or in California broadly, across the country, we're basically seeing ICE just roll up with impunity to people's neighborhoods,
Yeah.
schools,
Yep.
workplaces. Quite, and again, it's like for all the talk about be grateful you don't live in an authoritarian country. I mean, like they're quite literally press ganging people. The
Well,
amount of people. Go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah. I mean, I won't like say like I will say one of my colleagues was talking about this. That I'll keep them completely anonymous, but whenever they come back from um their country of origin, that ICE always harasses them,
Mm,
and part of it is like this very like infantilizing thing of like, oh well, like if that country ever gives you any problem, let us know because we're here to help you, and it's like,
oh
come
gosh.
on, like very clearly that's not the case. But one thing also, and I was gonna say, like, I mean, I haven't followed the LA protests and riots quite as much as I maybe should have. But one of the things that I think it really highlights is I think the extent to which that like we really are in kind of this like again like that the culture war is like this real thing, right? Where obviously like this is like an issue that matters to people as well, but like I always think of like where the way they've the right has historically tried to frame like sanctuary cities and things like that is that
Yeah.
like it's these like political elites who are like keeping illegals here, against your interests and against your will. Yet we're seeing like the opposite of that, right? We're seeing people organically stand up for their neighbors, regardless of their status, as citizens or the legality of their migration papers or whatever. So
It's
like this
it
shows that like yeah, people like organically do buy this, but it's not good enough, right? You can't have like the freedom to have like your city be a sanctuary city, because they just refuse to accept that as like part of the culture in any way.
right, and it's also just like a massive like denial of existing reality, right? And we can talk maybe at length in another episode or in another time about like the various forms of leopards ate my face in Trump voters, where it's like I didn't know they were deporting my workers. I didn't know they were deporting my farmhands. There's probably an additional conversation to be had about just how this is going to affect agriculture in the United States more broadly, but
Well, did you see Trump's statement about that?
I didn't. Oh no.
He said that like, well, we gotta let them stay, gotta keep the farmers, which like
Just all this cruelty to be like, my bad, my bad. Oh my
right.
god. Oh my god. So I mean, and the thing that's just it keeps sticking in my craw, especially as you see like Ro Khanna types being like, we condemn the violence even though Trump really has violated the usual precepts of American federalism. And this is again like not to bring it back to Michigan, but this is why I was so critical of Dana Nessel's decision to let the feds into Michigan to whether it's DHS or ICE or whoever it is, like you set a bad precedent for how federalism can be executed. And again, Gruesome Gavin is scoring points on this, but
Well, also, I mean, real quick on
yeah,
Ro
yeah, yeah.
Khanna, because he also played a role for that Musk story that I forgot, where
Oh
he
no.
thinks that we need to like bring him into the fold on our side, and like that's just insane.
Of course he
Um,
believes that. Like Ro Khanna is his own variety of tech CEO turned politician. Of course he
right?
believes that.
Yeah. I was very pleasantly surprised that I think it was like him and like literally like one other Democrat that were like advocating for that. Like even like the usual suspects were not saying like this is a good idea.
I mean, it's like I'm sorry. Once this guy did the fucking Hitler salute, like it's over. Come on, man. You don't want this guy anywhere around you. So again, and we will be working on a follow up episode on the situation in LA. Stay tuned for that. Um, but again, like I don't think people are really understanding like the desperation that people are facing in response to these raids, right? Like we're saying, this is happening. If it's not happening to you, it's happening to someone you know, whether it's a friend, someone you work with, someone who's an acquaintance. It's happening to people it's happening in your community. And when people are pushed to desperate circumstances, violence breaks out. And I think there's a lot of tone policing and a lot of this respectability stuff all the time that comes in. So let me invoke JFK here. And these are from his remarks on the first anniversary of the Alliance for Progress. Um, those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable. Not that I'm in any position to morally pontificate on any of this, but like the situation has created a powder keg. The powder keg has busted 5 times at this point. Why are people still clutching their pearls about this? I'll never know. And maybe it's because it hasn't affected them personally yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's inevitably a huge part of it too. It's just like it's the lack of like personal impact to it, and I think I don't know. We're in this era where like I mean, I kind of reject like some of the like. I mean, there's aspects that like all politics is local is maybe still true, but I don't think it's necessarily the case anymore. But I do think all politics is personal now, right? Like it's just
Yeah.
how do you personally feel about it? How are you personally affected or not affected by it, right? People don't care what if you cut, benefits that you're not going to receive, right? That's why we build in like all this means testing stuff to make you inherently resentful of these policies. Because they're not going to benefit you unless you're, very specifically, meet this particular threshold. That's, in some cases semi-arbitrary.
Right, and it's again, it's always the same suspects of like the most comfortable, and again, not to bring up this old term, but like the most privileged people, um, who really think they're immune to any of these things, whether it's quite literally death or hardship or whatever it is. Once it's your turn, and I'm not saying that like everyone's got to take a turn suffering, but like you cannot control how life turns out. And when hardship comes for you, when like cruelty happens to you, I hope you remember who you were when it was happening to someone else.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Maybe on a broader, again, in as this all this is folding out too. Probably the craziest event that's happened in the past 48 hours was all I have this is titled under a section, "Are we in the mask off era?" So far right dude, guy named what, Vance? The guy dude's name was Vance. I forgot what his name was. I'm not gonna fuck this guy. So some guy impersonates a cop, and basically shoots a Minnesota state senator and his wife. In that particular case, he shot the senator 9 times, shot his wife 8 times, then went to
And those two have
the.
survived.
They survived, fortunately. I think the wife tweeted recently that
Yep.
her husband's recovering, and should be fine, hopefully. But the other victim in this case was the Minnesota Speaker of the House and her husband. They were fatally wounded, right? So there was a manhunt. They got him recently, but lo and behold, it is none other than a far right activist. And I think was he involved in Republican politics, or was he involved in something more sinister? I can't recall.
He might have been more sinister. Because I watched like there's a lot of clips of like different like sermons that he would give to like religious groups, which I think were like mostly like in other countries.
Oh
It
no.
looked like, but like yeah, and it's kind of the tone that you would expect for it. Um, you have a lot of yeah, and I think the bigger thing with this is it's not just the mask off era, right? This is like full on. We live in multiple realities, right? It's pretty well collaborated what this guy has done historically, who he is. Yet we see, part of it was one, police found no Kings flyers
Right.
in his car, which I mean anyone who I think was anyone would think that otherwise. But then like the right has just latched on to conspiracy after conspiracy with this guy. They've insisted, like including Senator Mike Lee, has insisted that he is a Marxist. They have
They keep
insisted,
saying this shit. Oh my
yeah,
god.
that he was possibly an illegal immigrant who was doing this because and this isn't even true. I think only the speaker voted against, who was the one that was killed. She voted against a bill that would have continued Medicaid funding in December onwards for illegal immigrants in the state of Minnesota, or at least eligibility for them. And the fact that she's the speaker leads me to think, like, I mean, and I'm not like, contradict the record she voted for, but I just know that like there's sometimes procedural rules that might influence why a speaker would have voted against something.
Right.
Um, that like, so like I don't think that like, but the idea that like, oh, this is all in retaliation for that is insane. This guy has he has a list of like 60 targets. Vance Bolter, which
Yeah, that was his name.
but yeah, registered Republican. I think he may have been a past like appointee to some like kind of irrelevant subcommittee under
Mm.
Governor Walz and his predecessor. which is what people have kind of made a big point of. But he also had Tim Walz on his hit list, right? He had a bunch of other Democrats. He had a bunch of abortion providers. All of these people were people he intended to kill, or at least attempt to. And the fact that like we have seen like in the wake of this, right? The right, like it's not even like typically when this happens, they just kind of like toss aside the blame, right? They won't take accountability or anything like that.
Right.
They might have inspired someone. Now it's just like let's full on, even after the facts have emerged, let's continue to insist that this is a symptom of the left being like just raving violent lunatics, which again, completely unsubstantiated historically in this scenario, just period.
It's just insane. And like again, the way that they've closed the gap on this is eerie. They're doubling down on it. And I think like I know people were making fun of a lot of those tweets where it's like this guy's a Marxist, and then of course it comes out he's a registered Republican. I also have to just look at this in the same vein, and I forgot to mention this as part of our previous topic, but I think it applies here as well. Wasn't there some like Florida Sheriff's Department in response to the California?
Yeah, that if you protest, you'll be like graveyard dead. Like to
Right.
clarify, like I'm not, we're not just gonna like kill you with laughter. We're gonna actually kill you. Which is insane. And again, like in California, I mean, I haven't followed it as closely, but other than like whatever the like self-driving vehicle service is, like I know they have burned some of those cars. Have they really done much else in terms of like property damage even?
I'm still working on reading this up because I think what I'm also trying to understand, even though like this may be a false equivalency that I'll have to disprove, is to what extent did the 92 riots set the stage for this, even though they're not necessarily on the same grounds, right? The thing that always sticks out to me, and I know this sounds deeply cynical, is like, does LAPD really need a reason to brutalize somebody? And I was kind of reading how like the 92 riots were kind of influenced by LAPD tactics on suppressing trade union activity, for example, right?
Sure.
So a police department that has those strategies, bringing them back out for 2025, and also exacerbating
and the broader issue too. It's not just the police departments, like bringing in the National Guard and all of this
Yes,
stuff.
yes.
And the thing I had forgotten to mention with this is like with Gavin Newsom, like he's like the unambiguous like winner of this. Like, and I'm kind of disturbed that like we might have gone from a point where he was, I think, pretty much a non-contender for 2028, like this being like his big moment. Like the only thing that'll help him more is if Trump actually follows through on the threat to arrest him. As
Yeah.
problematic as that would broadly be for our society and democracy and whatnot, if he actually did that, like it just turn him into like the ultimate martyr, and I think that would be problematic even beyond just sort of the actions there, because I mean, other than like him not collaborating, he really isn't doing anything here.
Yeah, because it's like the Democrats, for their, I mean, to their credit, I think are correct to be like Trump is setting a dangerous precedent for federalism. Now, of course, you should probably have a criticism of Dana Nessel in that. That's my crankery for the day. But I think again, it's just like the whole fear they have of the right-wing rhetoric post the George Floyd protests, right? They don't want to be lumped in with it. They don't want to even risk taking like a philosophical approach of like, well, there's a reason why the violence is happening. It's very, again, it's like the Democrats have put themselves in a position through like some of these really bad missteps during the Biden term, whether it was running to the right on immigration, whether it was letting the right kind of set these discursive boundaries or whatever, however you choose to define it. you're right. Gavin Newsom could have. Has he tried to sue Trump over this? Do you know? I know he
Uh,
had some lawsuit against Trump. I don't know if
I
this comes
think I
under it
can't
or
remember if it
not.
was from him, if it originated with him or not, but I know the court did say that like the I would assume it was probably Newsom then who initiated the lawsuit because they said that Trump can't deploy the National Guard that way. It's the governor's call.
Which is why Trump instead opted to send in the Marines, which is its
Right, yeah.
own. And again, like from what I've been reading, is like morale among the deployed Marines is severely low, being like, I didn't sign up for
Yeah,
this.
there's I can't remember what it's called.
They're calling it the
But
War Dogs unit or something like that.
no, the there's like a hotline for people who are like in distress in like the armed services, but they've just been like going like it's been like that the phone is like constantly ringing. Like there's just such a backlog because
Oh
of,
wow.
them being like, because of the morale being that low.
Which again, like that happening around the same time as the quote unquote military parade is it's poignant to say the least. And it is like on the one hand, you do want to hear these things and be like, maybe the mask is cracking a bit. Maybe the right is flustered and making more mistakes, and maybe they're losing their grip a bit, and maybe that presents an opportunity for something good to happen. Hey, I have my fingers crossed like anyone else, right? But
Mhm.
I don't think you can see that without at least bracing yourself for all the people they kind of want to harm as they're having their freak out. And I think that's probably the biggest lesson from the first Trump term is that even when Trump loses his grip, even when the mask cracks a bit, even when they fumble and take an L, they still find a way to get their lick on someone innocent in
Yeah.
that way. And I'm still bracing myself for the worst. No one wants it to happen, but it's just like I can't help but feel like I've had to clench this entire year in just preparation for what horrible thing happens next. And again, like I just added this as a bottom line point because you're seeing more and more of this rhetoric from the right of just like this increased desire to like I hope to God someone starts a riot so I can shoot somebody. And I don't know
Oh yeah.
where like we went from good guy with a gun to I'm just waiting for my turn to shoot somebody.
I mean, I think that that's the start of it, right? Is like, like the constant leaning into like the good guy with a gun. Like before it was, I think initially it was embedded as like, the idea of this deterrence of like bad things happening. But I think increasingly, like, and probably even back then, right? I mean, I think this has been the case for at least a decade. You have a lot of people just begging for their chance to be that quote unquote good guy with a gun.
Right.
It fuels that hero fantasy, right? The idea of like, oh, I'm gonna save some lives or save my own or my property, right? They like, they hope someone tries to break into their home in the middle of the night so they can, have an excuse to use the shotgun or whatever. Um, there's I think there's always been that, but it does feel like it's increasingly more prevalent, right? And I think probably like the real, especially like when it comes to the protests, I think the real wake up moment for that was uh what's his face? Kyle Rittenhouse.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, like he completely got away with that, right? He fulfilled that fantasy and was turned into a living saint by that movement.
Which is and again, like I not that we have to talk about Kyle Rittenhouse, but like it is just it has to be said like how dopey and fucking like cartoonishly oafish this guy is.
Yeah, I mean, like, the
And what
fact
he
that,
did
like
go ahead.
yeah, I was like, the fact that, like, the person who gets to, like, live your fantasy is, like, this much of a fucking dork, like, I mean, that you'd think that'd be a wake-up call. But it just yeah.
and it's like, I don't know, there's always been that talk about like how much of Trumpism and like the Trump right is this desire to create a parallel, celebrity or materialist mass culture that isn't beholden to what they deem to be liberal elements. And then when you look at it, it's the same like talk show garbage, except instead of some celebrity, it's like again, just a fucking like dead-eyed psycho. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know why like the modern right is like they read Blood Meridian and it was like that Judge Holden fella. I tell you, so that's a real cool guy. It's a real cool guy.
Right.
And then meanwhile, because I did want to in the initial concept. I thought this was going to be so easy. I thought we were just going to have fun at Trump and Musk's expense and maybe have a couple laughs about Welcome Fest. I can't even say anything about Welcome Fest in with all the things we've just talked about, because it just seemed like the Matt Iglesias, Alyssa Slotkin types having a little conference being like, damn, don't you hate everyone who's in our replies? And kind of accomplishing nothing in the process.
I mean, I know we've talked a little bit on like the abundance movement in the past.
Right.
I do think we probably warrants like its own episode sooner rather than later. I know we've got some other things on the pipeline too that would take priority, but I think it's definitely worth getting into because it's and it's interesting too, like as it pertains to like the New York mayor race, because it's the terminology has been appropriated, and they're not happy about it. But it's this real virus, I think, on that side where it's like I think before I had compared it to like I was like it's like the yassification of trickle down economics or something like that.
With with Ezra Klein being the progenitor of this too, that's even funnier. You're right though, because it's just like a new flavor of like liberal YIMBYism with a like minarchist small government bend. But fundamentally you're right. Like you just look at it and it's like what's the goal here? Like healing off a few urban conservatives? Like this is, and maybe this is like maybe too cynical on my part, because this is maybe this is just my private resentment coming out. It almost feels like to have a say or to be considered as a constituency whose vote matters, you have to be a property holder in some sense. So like homeowners or city
Which
residents.
is funny because it's such a regression over, I think, where most of politics has been for a while.
It is because like you would at least think that like demographics, like specifically like race, sex, gender demographics were what drove voter patterns, but like if you look at like again the abundance strategy here, it almost seems geared to like property developers and landlords entirely. The whole thing about like suborbital factories and drone deliveries is like just a little bit of like futurist sprinkling. I really don't buy that. But the whole crux of this is like, yeah, let's just get rid of zoning. And it's like,
which is also hilarious too when they like complain about like the main critique like is of the abundance is just like the lack of like any semblance of like class awareness in its precepts, and like they're like, oh well, like it's more complicated than just rich people bad, because like not all rich people are bad, but their whole like premise is like, oh, if we just like fix zoning laws, boom, that changes things.
And I'm just like, to what extent do you think right-wing organizers are going to buy this? First of all, they have their own answer to minarchism.
Well, I mean, their answer to it is like, well, we can just do that too.
Right.
Like, we're also in favor of like removing zoning laws, but for very different reasons.
Exactly.
Well, not even
exactly.
I'm not even just like convinced it's for different reasons, right? I mean, I've seen like most of the developments that you hear that are like built in Michigan. Like when I think of like housing being built in various places, I'm seeing a ton in every community of luxury apartments being put in.
Yes. Yes.
A ton. I mean, and when I say luxury, I mean I don't think I haven't been in most of these places. So I can't really testify to like if they meet the label, but I can tell you the price is pretty fucking luxurious. If you can afford that, and there's no way like any of these are like worth like what they're charging monthly rent for, like just 0% chance because some of these like are like obscenely expensive,
Like
for
$2,000 a month at least.
yeah, and like to like live right off M24 in like Orient, like who wants to do that?
That's
Like
the other thing that gets me. It's like it's luxury apartments, not even in like an urban center or like
right.
in a major downtown area. It's always like luxury apartments in a suburb that's like way too removed from anything. Lake Orion, Rochester as our local examples, right?
Yeah, there were some others where I know they were looking to like tear down a grocery store to replace it with luxury apartments. Which I mean just creates a whole other litany of problems. But it's just like I mean it's like there's definitely something to be said that there's 100% like this housing crisis, especially in places like California,
Yep.
and whatnot. But this can't be like the solution. Because it doesn't
It's
do anything. And
not.
it's just so ignorant too, where it's like, well, have you considered the fact that like, I don't know, like building any housing in LA is an endeavor that it's not when you're building housing in, the middle of nowhere in Texas.
Exactly. And it's like
Because you never hear either when it's like, oh, well, like these people are moving to red states. It's not like, oh, like people from California are moving into Dallas. Right? They're just moving into like, somewhere in Texas.
and
It's like, yeah,
and
it's really easy to develop rural areas.
also when they talk about these people moving to red states or like this migratory worker, right? It's not who you think it is. It's always like a yuppie or like mid-level professional who can afford to uproot every couple years and afford to pay that monthly, rent for a luxury apartment.
Yeah.
You're right. It is very like class unconscious. It's very out of touch, and I just don't think these guys get it. And I wonder like if it is like this, because I know they talk about elitism in like especially right wing populist circles and how like it's bad. But there is this weird trend I see in like Democratic Party messaging, and again the focus on messaging. We're back on like pod save territory again, right? Where it's like, why didn't the stupids listen? And I know like I feel like that a lot, but at the same time, and we're jumping into this with like the hunt for liberal Joe Rogan, right? Where it's like there's like systemic issues with how information is trickled down to the public. There's systemic issues with education, political education is like probably at its its nadir in contemporary times, and like people are kind of glued to their phones and consuming whatever slop the algorithm puts in front of them, and for whatever reason, I can't say it definitively, but I think enough people can say this was experience, that algorithm shifts right a lot for whatever reason.
Yep.
So if you don't have a strategy to address that, aside from we need to get our own Joe Rogan, without even examining that like Joe Rogan is a Libertarian Party guy who had a mid-level media career, and his podcast only took off because he was like the first guy to use iTunes for podcasts, basically.
Right. And it's this very top-down perspective, and it's like it's not like Joe Rogan isn't like the sole problem that, right? It's this entire media ecosystem that exists in the right, and like it exists sort of, kind of on the left, but in a very diminished way.
Yep.
And it's so much of it is it's not that like, and I get that it's a double-edged sword in some respects, right? Because like the big problem with it is like the right treats Joe Rogan and the various podcast filth out there with an air of legitimacy. I mean, like, look, I mean,
Yeah.
you've got an alternate media, quote unquote, chair or seat in the White House press pool now, where Tim Pool gets to hang out, wearing his stupid fucking beanie, asking
In
the
the
dumbest
DC
questions
heat.
imaginable.
In the DC
Yeah,
heat at this time of
exactly. And you know, you have him, you have, I'm sure there's other folks in there, but you have that whole ecosystem, and like part of it, yeah, like on the left, there's not quite the same incentive for it. Like there's not like the money in it, first off. And I think some of it is that they, you know, like they, the party wants to kind of control its message, but the problem is it doesn't really have a message. So like it's like, yeah, you're taking a risk going onto these shows, but it's like you need, they're not engaging with alternate media in the same way that the right is, right? It's not obscene to have the director of the FBI showing up on Joe Rogan, right? Like, I mean, yeah, it's kind of obscene, but like no one's like really like thinking like, oh wow, like this is you know, it's not shocking anymore because that's just how the right is. On the left, like who is the most major person that has made like any meaningful like podcast appearances? I know like Harris has showed up on a couple during the campaign. I thought they were kind of weird choices. But you know, for the most part, like I can't think of like, you know, you're not gonna get like, I don't know. I mean, like part of it's like also I'm like, you know, do I want any of these folks showing up either? But like, you know what I mean? Like you're not gonna get like, you know, Alyssa Slotkin showing up on like anyone that's relevant. Like
Alyssa Slotkin, if you want to come through on Greenhouse Gaslighting, for a
we're your
hardball interview,
we're your constituents, you know, come on.
right. Come on,
Um,
we can only promise hardball interview. We no softball, on the issues. We will be asking extensive questions about your involvement with the Central Intelligence Agency. But that aside,
apparently, I mean, the doors have been open. Cash Patel, you know, he was talking about what you have. I mean, and the stuff that you have is out of date anyways. So
right. I mean, for all we know, you know, Tulsi Gabbard had to use AI to read the JFK files. So here we are.
that wasn't. I mean,
That made me cry. That made me cry.
Oh my god. Also, like, speaking of Tulsi, I have to throw a stray at her way real quick. In this, like, my only defining position is I'm supposedly against regime change wars when we're actively discussing a regime change war in Iran. Where is she?
That's what I'm saying. It's like this is even more of a Looney Tunes cabinet than the first term. And the only reason why
somehow it's more permanent too.
That's what I'm saying. Like the only reason they're not changing dudes every week is because they've just accelerated the news cycle.
Yeah.
So it's like the Democratic Party now is like funneling all this money into like, we need to get young men back into the fold. We need to study alternate media. It's like, what do you mean study? Like, you guys have watched this for a minute. You guys have like dropped the ball on any regulation when it comes to technology. You've dropped the ball on putting new members of your party who understand how this stuff works into leadership. You guys have let like literal skeletons you know, call up the CEO of TikTok and be like, why is my grandson not calling me, right? So
I mean, not to be that guy, and I apologize for this, but like, you want to get young men back, you know, maybe lessen the dress code for AOC.
No, we do not need more AOC. Like, I feel like the AOC thirst has only worked on right-wing men. I don't know why, but like that's where the thirst has gone.
You get a little bit of that, like, oh, look at what we have. You get a little bit of that competition, but like, I mean, like, I there's got to be a way. I'm joking about Gooners aside. Like there has to be a way to like make the party sexier in like a more enticing way, not like literally like, oh hey, let's just have our let's have our elected officials out in like bathing suits or whatever. I mean, like there's a way to like again, like you put this big emphasis on messaging, and it's yeah, I don't see any of the like implications that like this messaging is like remotely effective. Right? It's just it seems like okay, you keep like it's you're tone policing and stuff like that, but there's no indication that any of it is like paid off in any meaningful way.
100%. And it's like all they think about is like, what if we advertise to gamers? It's like how do we get the gamer vote? How do we get the gooner vote? And it's like it still doesn't address like what's at play here, which is this absolutely cynical approach to politics. And again, it's not to say that like the right is sincere in any way. They're also equally
Right.
cynical in
Well,
the opposite way, and what they offer is like negative benefit. It's like, you have one eye. Do you want me to take both your neighbor's eyes out? That's what they're offering. And what the Democrats could cynically or honestly offer is some kind of positive benefit or positive right. But then they would have to give voters something, and they would have to actually jump away from their cynicism. So and again, those decisions out of my fucking hands. I don't know what to do.
yeah, and I think kind of the emphasis on sort of micro targeting different like voter demographics is probably also the wrong way to go about it too. Like I mean, to an extent, it makes sense, but I also think that like it's like how do you appeal to a group? Like it's like okay, well, this is the same way they kind of like gravitated away from kind of blue collar workers and whatnot, right? It was like, well, like we think a lot of them are pretty racist, and like let's just not like cater to them. And it's like, yeah, that the first part is kind of true and whatnot, but it's like you're like in terms of appealing to like gamers, like whatever gamer culture looks like these days, I don't exactly think it's a great place to penetrate necessarily in terms of what the average gamer's ideology looks like.
And that's what I'm saying is like it would require Democrats to actively engage with societal rot for the first time in many years.
Yeah, as opposed to
And
just ignoring it.
Exactly. Like we don't even have Bill Clinton style. I'm the governor of a small state, so when people say they're hurting, I feel their pain. We don't even have that anymore.
Well, we don't even have we don't really have good messengers either, right? Like we're the party of messaging when like our candidate is a dementia-addled, cancer-stricken adult who can barely make it through a few sentences, and some of that's okay, it's some speech impediment stuff. It's stuff you can't control, but it's all well, also you can't control the dementia either, I guess. But like I mean, it's just the insistence on that, right? And there's some coverage there too. We were talking before the show about my media and politics class, and I think a major focal point I wanted to do was that book from Jake Tapper on like the original sin of covering up Joe Biden's mental decline, which is I mean, like what cover up, right?
Well, he was involved in said cover up. Let's be honest.
Exactly, yeah, but it's this broader sense of how the media has continued to like become like like some of these like stories that are like apparently quite crucial. And there's other ones that are even bigger examples of this. Like they're stuffed away in like $25 books that come out years after the fact.
And I think like the NYC mayoral race probably is the way to look at this in a microcosm, and especially in a safely, majority Democratic Party electorate.
Yeah.
You're really seeing what's at play here. I haven't been following this race too closely, aside from the resurgence of one Andrew Cuomo, who we don't know whether or not he's sundowning himself. And then you have probably the newest breath of fresh air in Zoran Momdani. Again, just like insane pedigree on his part, like professor and famous director parents, amazing. But what he's actually offering,
Pretty solid campaigner too.
very solid campaigner, very on brand, very on message. I wouldn't even argue like he's an endearing figure for his like just I forget what year it was or whether this was recent, but like cussing out a Trump cabinet member when he was at the New York Capitol and kind of being held back by the cops for doing it. Like again, he's like very endearing, very sincere guy, I see, but also like what he's offering is a clear articulation of these positive benefits. He wants to expand rent control, he wants to expand social services and reduce the cost, if not make public transit free. And of course, everyone goes into the same rhetoric every time. How is he going to pay for it? How are you going to do it? Yeah, yeah. But it's like you're offering something. I cannot tell you what Cuomo is offering other than name recognition.
He's not, and like it's to me, this is like this big litmus test because I mean, I was debating with a few people about this. Where like there's some people who don't really agree with um Mamdani's politics. They're a little bit more right wing, obviously. But they're like, well, like this is going to be a bad for Democrats. I'm like, I don't think so because like the thing is like the party, like yeah, there's some stigma about it being like too far left, but I think like the thing is, it's like they have this stigma of being too far left and you not seeing like any like productive results because they aren't actually too far left. So it's like this kind of dual stigma of like ineffective and people associating that with more left-wing policies. But to me, like Cuomo is like this noose around their neck.
Yeah.
Right. The fact that the party didn't just kind of like come out and be like, no, like we're like screw him. We're endorsing literally like vote for literally everyone else on your ticket before you vote for him because it's ranked choice voting in New York as well. So you have some weird dynamics. I think it was like the what was it? Some liberal coalition group in New York that said that like we've neglected to rank either Momdani or Cuomo, which is like basically just telling people to throw away their vote in a ranked choice voting system, which is quite difficult to do. But they found a way. But like that's like kind of it's like this thing where it's like I think just from a like pure NYC New Liberals is the group that they ranked everyone else, which is not helpful. But like Cuomo to me, like it's just like this represents like the institutional rot. This is why people hate the Democratic Party is you have old unpopular figures at its helm that are allowed to call the shots, that are allowed to run the show. And that's the party that I think people are sick of. And it doesn't, like Cuomo's scandals obviously add to that, but it's not like, and I acknowledge, right, there was a point in 2020 where people were like calling for him to like, steal the convention basically. And I think that was insane too. Considering his general like, political career up to that point as well. But it's just there's like nothing redeemable about him. And it's just coasting on name recognition and time will tell if that's good enough. But I think the idea that like I think if it's good enough, it's really shame on the party for failing to intervene at any stage of this.
Especially after the embarrassment of the Eric Adams, mayorship, right?
Right.
How do you even justify dropping the ball this hard? But also, like, again, we've already done a profile on Andrew Cuomo. I don't know if I want to get into him again. We can talk at length about his, very cringeworthy, as a New Yorker, I'm gay, but like all that aside, right? Like, there is something to be said, especially when we talk about the decline of effective messaging in the Democratic Party. If you look at Andrew and Chris and like their careers respectively, and contrast that to Mario Cuomo, their father, who was like renowned as like one of the greats in like Democratic Party oratory, right?
Mm-hmm.
How far the fucking apple's fallen from the tree. and it's just also like to speak to your earlier point about how like, oh, like it's not going to go anywhere and his career probably stops short after this for Mamdani if he makes the mayorship. I thought the calculus around being NYC mayor is like once you get it, you're stuck with that and you can't climb after that. So wouldn't this be like the best place to experiment and then punish him accordingly if he fails?
Well, it wasn't.
Because
It wasn't so much. It wasn't so much about him. It was about like what he sends a message about the broader party as a whole, which I don't think he does really.
I mean, the New York Democratic Party is renowned for being like one of the more right wing Democratic parties in the country. So again, it's like anytime I hear concern trolling like that, I'm like, okay, either tell me what you really think or pick up a book. But
I mean, but yeah, like definitely career wise, he has a ceiling. You know, and not just because it's New York politics, but because like, I mean, he also like because he wasn't born in the United States, he can't be president.
right,
I mean, I guess he could be senator. But I mean, I think that that's kind of there's multiple rungs on that ladder that are blocking his ambitions there one way or the other.
right. But it's like again, like wouldn't this be the perfect opportunity to experiment with some of these progressive policies, especially after just the austerity regime of Eric Adams and like just how the COVID years had been a disaster for NYC, right? Like this is a real time to rebuild, and I think this cynical, fundamentally, it all comes down to anti-communism at the end of the day, right? Of like any kind of positive benefit being given to anybody has to be called into question. Okay, all right, you kept your ideological purity on those grounds.
Yeah.
How does that translate in the general for you? And I'm not saying that I foresee the next mayor if Zoran doesn't win the primary that it would go to a Republican mayor of NYC. I don't know if that's in the cards per se. But like how many times do we want a replay of like Eric Adams? How many times do we want a replay of Bloomberg? How many times do we want a replay of Giuliani? Does anything matter to anyone?
Yeah. It's like, again, like these big cities just kind of, they defeat like a lot of the arguments because we tend to argue, like in academia about how like primaries tend to like produce the more extreme candidates, but it's like those cities, like, I mean, they kind of show the severe asymmetry that like the Democrats have compared to Republicans, right? Because it's like, yeah, consistently we're not getting, exactly paragons of liberalism, at least in recent decades, out of those primaries.
Right, and I think like again, we have so many different angles we can go on. Maybe the next time we do talk about the abundance agenda and its follies, maybe we talk about the Birchers and how the systemic smearing of any progressive or any left-wing organizing has been a disaster for anything good, and especially like has made the situation of actual liberals more fraught. Or we talk about how Gundam Seed Freedom is the actual test case for the abundance agenda. But it's just again like the consequences of this allergy to positive visions for the future, or this allergy to giving somebody something, or it's like what happened to the courage to being disliked? Yeah, Republicans are always going to call you something, like wipe it off.
Right, and like it's like I don't know, like we've been hearing that for like argument for years. Like it really came to a head in 2016 with Bernie, and it's just like, okay, you say this that like okay, well they're going to call us socialists. Has that changed? Bernie Sanders lost 2016 in the primary. Did they not call us socialists after that?
They were calling Biden, Joseph Robinette Biden, a Marxist.
They're calling a guy who killed, a Democratic member of, a state legislator, a Marxist. Like it's the words don't mean anything. We don't live in a society where truth, any of that matters.
And it's funny you say that, because like this is always where my mind goes, where it's like, what happened to the right hanging on Jordan Peterson's very words about the dangers of postmodernism and the dangers of ascribing meaninglessness to things that may be timeless, right? What has happened? Were you just selective with your outrage? Were you guys on benzos? What was it?
I don't know. I mean, he's kind of lost. He's kind of gassed though. He's kind of lost any relevance.
Oh my god! I mean, that's the thing. Is we're living in the consequences of a society without meaning. Unemployment's up, costs are up. You see things get worse every day. Why is it so fucking hazy in June? Is it like the wildfires that we gave up trying to do anything about during Trump 1 are just bad? Oh my god, it's just like, there's this maybe there is just some like karmic or like dark magic thing at play here, where it's like, in invoking this mythical past of making America great again, we have doomed ourselves to abandoning the future. And I don't want to end on that mystical note, but like, I don't know where else to go. I don't know.
There's no future to go to. Welcome to the present, everyone.
All I'm saying is get Ricardo Marcenos up there. Let's start the Universal Charter Century. Let's get a couple O'Neill cylinders in space. Let's send this fleet out to Jupiter, get some of that H3 gas.
Yeah. Still need that gas.
Right. We will still need that gas well into the future. And, we'll send the Earth's population into space. Hopefully there's no consequences of that whatsoever.
Probably isn't.
No.
Probably a net benefit to everyone.
Right. I swear to God, I remember when I was on Twitter, like, someone did just comment, like, can you guys stop doing the Gundam episodes? And I'm like,
damn.
It's like, you do your own podcast, dude. Like, what do you want?
Wow.
It's like, you
don't with that note, guess what's happening next episode?
Yep. Is there anything else that we might have missed, or any other note you want us to end on?
No, but screw that guy.
Yep, we're doing Gundam.
I don't know if I should say that to a viewer, but like,
we'll
review what we want.
It's all love. If you don't like an episode, you are under no obligation to listen. You can listen to the next one.
It's not like it's the only episodes we're putting out.
That's what I'm saying. That's what. Oh my gosh. It's all love. And please, tune into the next one. Thanks for tuning into this one, dear listeners. We'll catch you on the flip side. Take care.